Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog. I've got a quick question for you. Which version of me is in more danger? Today we're talking about damage and survivability and the relationship between the two. Let's go. So once you realise that it's going to be a two-way firing range and the damage is going to be coming back at you, you start to realise that maybe judging a build's effectiveness based solely on the amount of damage that it can output might not be the best way. Sometimes the pursuit of damage can lead to a less effective build. I'll give you an example. Come over to the left-hand side of the firing range. Now, headshots come with an additional damage bonus. 75% is what they add on the sheet. It's less than that, but they do more damage. No one's going to argue with that, and considerably more damage than what an average bullet does. So clearly the most effective tactic should be to just headshot everything. But come over to the left hand side of the range. Put it on easy. Targets are between like 12 and 15 meters away. And I want you to kill targets as quickly as you possibly can, once through going for just body shots, and then once through going just for headshots. And tell me which one is most effective. And if by some chance that your skill level is at a level, or you're using a weapon that's more stable, or whatever it may be, that you happen to manage to get the targets down quicker with headshots, what I want you to remember is that this is a one-way shooting range. No fire is coming back, and those targets aren't moving. So in this instance, the pursuit of damage has led to a less effective strategy, unless your skill level is one that allows you to master those headshots, in which case it is more effective for you to go for headshots out to 15 meters. For most people, that balancing point probably sits at around 5 meters. If a target is not standing still, is not within 5 meters, then going for headshots is going to be less effective. As in, it is not going to be the most effective tactic available. The meta. It's not going to be the meta. And the skill level is an important part of what is meta. What is meta for one person is not going to be meta for another person. And there is a constant balancing act between skill level, damage, and survivability. And in order to understand the positives, the negatives, and then make a decision about what is most effective, we have to understand what are the factors that go into it. So damage and survivability are two sides of the same coin. Let's have a look at that coin, and then we'll break it down further in a little bit. So damage and survivability. So I can optimize my build, my weapon, my skills for damage. And I can do this also for survival. Two sides. I'm going to, in most cases, subtract from one in order to add to the other. Two sides of the same coin. I can increase my damage by increasing my accuracy. I can do this without any changes to my build by just being closer to the enemy. I can also do this by being inside the optimal range of my weapon. But the other side of the coin is, although they don't have optimal range, if you are closer to an enemy, they are more accurate and they are capable of doing more damage. I can sustain the damage that I do for longer. So if I'm able to constantly fire, then I'm going to do more damage. If my reload time is shorter and I'm back in the fight doing damage quicker, then I'm sustaining my damage more often, which means that I'm going to increase the amount of damage that I do. By the same token, I can increase my survival by limiting the amount of damage that an enemy can do to me. Or I can build to absorb that damage. Two sides of the same coin. And the last one is that I can damage more efficiently. So I can use weak spots, I can prioritize, or I can simply damage more enemies at once. The other side of that coin is that I can reduce the efficiency of the enemy. So I can expose myself less. And this goes hand in hand with limiting damage in that I can use cover. I can only expose myself when absolutely necessary in order to do damage. One of the downsides is that you have to expose yourself to do damage with a weapon. And so I can limit the number of enemies that have a shot at me. And I can also prioritize those enemies that are more likely to do more damage. So let's break all of these down. First one is build efficiency. Now at this point, I want to point you to another content creator called Dispatch, who has done an excellent video on this exact thing, build efficiency, and where it is most efficient to gain either damage or survival, and what you should be prioritizing when you're building if you are focusing on either one of those things. But the most benefit that you can gain is when you have the least diminishing effect on one side with the maximum benefit on another. Now I can show you 4 examples in one build right here. So this is a striker build. Now the first and most obvious one that even the staunchest of alpha males going for raw damage will have to admit that they sacrifice, and that is the shield. The shield adds 1.5 million health, or 1.4 million health in this case. 1.4 million on top of only 738. So essentially I have increased my total armor pool by almost an additional 200%. Well, it's 150 if you include your health. And all I've sacrificed is one skill. You know, if the sole priority of this build was to do damage, then that skill would be something like a striker drone, or maybe some cluster mines or something like that, where I can drop it passively, not affect my ability to do damage with my main weapon. But the decision is there where I subtract that small amount of damage in order to add survivability to my build. And it is 2 sides of the same coin. By me being able to survive for longer whilst exposed to do damage, it means that I can expose myself and do damage for much longer, allowing me to do more damage. And the sacrifice that I've made in regards to damage has increased my survivability, which in turn has increased my ability to do damage. So it is an efficient way of making that sacrifice. Many people will run with a reviver hive. Some people will actually add a damage talent here, a damage skill, because they're not concerned about the loss of time that occurs when you die and have to restart, because they have different goals. But for most people, they want to move through a mission as efficiently as possible without dying, because that is efficient, not having to repeat an entire 10 minutes worth of a mission. I've also added preservation to my weapon. Now I don't know that a lot of people know this, but preservation does not add 10% armor. It actually adds, I think, 12.5 or 13%. You can easily confirm this yourself in the shooting range, but trust me, it is more than 10% armor. So it is an incredibly efficient way of adding survivability to my build. I would much prefer to do a mission comfortably than I would doing it maybe 1 second faster by having a damage talent on my weapon. And then the last one, and rare cases, and these tend to be the absolute best or most efficient ways to add to your build, and that is using the gunner specialization. And why is it one of these rare cases? Is because it adds benefit to both sides of the coin. The gunner specialization is one of those rare situations of efficiency and effectiveness, in that it adds to both sides of the coin without detracting from either one of them. So on the damage side, every kill I get an extra 5% increased rate of fire, increasing my damage per second. If I stay in the one spot for 1 second, I get an increased accuracy, I get an increased reload speed, sustaining my damage and increasing the amount of damage that I can do. Every third reload is 50% faster, again putting me back in the fight quicker, allowing me to sustain damage on a more consistent rate, which means I increase the damage that I'm doing. And then it also adds 10% armor on kill. Increased survivability also translates into damage because I'm able to do more damage when I have a higher amount of armor. I'm able to absorb more damage before I have to retreat and not able to do damage. And it also has a crowd control skill as well attached to it, making Gunner for DPS builds one of the most effective tactics available. So it's at this point that I want to talk about a talent that a lot of people are advocates of, which I absolutely hate. Glass Cannon. All damage you deal is amplified by 25%, but all damage you take is amplified by 50%. So you're adding to the damage side of the coin, but you are adding much more to the other side of the coin, as in you are reducing your survivability. So the argument is that if I kill things quicker, I'm in less danger. And that is true. If you kill things quicker, you are in less danger. Now if you do the maths on the enemy's bullet damage and multiply it out into a DPS, any one of the enemies are capable of dealing between 500,000 damage per second, anywhere up to about 1.2 million damage per second, depending on how close you are and how exposed you are and all the rest of it. I'm just going to show you an example of what 5 enemies heroic level are actually capable of. I showed you their initial bullet damage at the beginning, but this build is a pure tank build, and the shield is 15 million in HP, and I've got an Artificer that's increasing its survivability as well. At the beginning of the fight, and the initial gunshot rings out, for the first second no one is firing, making it the best opportunity for me to have done damage if I wanted to. After 1 second, I've got one person firing at me. The engineers now added another enemy, and a dangerous enemy at that, being the turret, into the fight. And then after 3 seconds, we now have 3 people firing at me. And then very shortly, if left unchecked, every single enemy is now firing at me. And remember, this shield is 15 million. And what this equates to is essentially 5 enemies delivering probably in excess of 4 million DPS per second. That's what they're capable of. And a DPS build on a friendly is generally going to have about 700,000 in armor. And if you add in a shield, that's let's say it's 2.5 million, which means that just 5 heroic enemies, if you are stupid and are out of cover, standing in the open, or you've exposed yourself in order to do damage, are capable of wiping you out in less than half a second. That's what we're up against. But let's go with a low estimate, and we'll go with 500,000 DPS. And what we'll say is, I've already worked out that the average wave is 8 enemies, but let's just say 7. So in the first second of a fight, it's unlikely that you're actually going to receive any fire. The enemy has been surprised, and they all start scattering for cover. If you do receive fire, that first, after 1 second essentially, it's generally going to be one of the assault, or the soldiers, or whatever it may be, that's going to start firing at you. Once everybody else has started moving into cover, finding positions, they are adding more fire every second from every single person. If you leave them unchecked, they're going to reach a peak of about 3.5 million DPS, and that's going to stay there until you do something about it. The graphs are bullshit, but they're here for a purpose, to demonstrate something. This is what it would look like if you're killing things. So if you're killing on average 1 every second, essentially at the time that it reaches its peak damage, it's at 4 enemies, but you've already killed 3, and you're now on your way to killing the last one. So the damage will drop. Again, bullshit, but just to demonstrate a point. Now, if we add in glass cannon, this is what it looks like as far as the damage potential is concerned. You've increased the amount of damage possible by every enemy by 50%. Now, of course, this isn't accurate because the glass cannon build is going to be able to kill enemies quicker. And if we say that we're comparing glass cannon to having no damage whatsoever as a damage talent on the chest, which means that it's going to kill enemies 25% faster than what the other build will. So at the time that this build reaches this point, the glass cannon build will have killed an extra enemy. So it's going to kill 1 more enemy. So what that looks like is this. So essentially at this point, the glass cannon build is on its way down. It avoids this peak because it removes that enemy before it's able to get there. And what you see at the end of it is, although it's killed everything quicker, it's avoided having the massive peak by killing that extra enemy in those first few seconds. It actually has not reduced damage exposure at all. All it's actually managed to do is to move this portion where the other build is in more danger because there's more enemies left on the pitch. It's now moved that danger to earlier in the fight, where the lower number of enemies firing are doing more damage. The area of the blue is exactly the same as the red. There is no reduction in damage. All you've done is actually moved the danger to earlier in the fight. And this is a low number of enemies, being only 7, with the average wave being 8. So sometimes I remember when I was doing the testing, I think there was waves up to 17, I think there might have been 119 wave. So you can see that if you're unable to reduce that number of enemies considerably in a short period of time, then your exposure to danger is going to massively increase. And that's what it looks like here. So if you fail to kill one of those enemies, so let's say that the exposure to danger in the early phase of the fight forces you to retreat and start putting a med kit to use, you are allowing all those other enemies to get their positions and add their damage to the pool and fire on your position, which means that you are actually in more danger, even though you're still able to kill those enemies quicker. Even if your skill level is at a level where you're able to control the angles and reduce your exposure, and let's say you only take 1 bullet from every enemy. So 1 bullet for a normal build. This is actually pretty accurate as far as what the average bullet damage is. There's 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 bullets damage. Oh, let's say 7 because there were 7 enemies in the thing. 7 bullets damage. I'm still able to do damage with 4 armor, with all 4 armor bars. But if I change that to a build with glass cannon, 7 bullets damage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now I'm in health damage, and I'm actually in real danger of going down. So what does that mean in normal circumstances? Well, in normal circumstances, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either I am able to do sustained damage less often. I have to come out in bursts if I'm not going to use a med kit, which is going to reduce my DPS. But if I have to use a med kit, that's 2 seconds where I am incapable of dealing damage. If I'm using Survivalist or Firewall, there's also an amount of time that I need to wait before my armor bar is recovered enough for me to be able to then return to doing sustained damage. So that 1 second that I saved over the course of the fight has now been eradicated, and the gain that I've made in the next one as well. If I go down completely, that is 10 seconds that my revive hive is getting me back up again. I've now eradicated pretty much any time savings that additional damage would have given me for the entire duration of the mission. And God forbid I should go down completely and die during a mission, which means that I've wasted minutes worth of damage to no end. High damage numbers are great for clickbait on videos, but the content creator certainly isn't going to show you the time that they died and wasted the entire mission and had to restart. But I think most people want to be able to move through a mission as quickly as possible, yet still be able to survive the entire time. Now, Glass Cannon is a fairly unique case. It's giving you damage on one side and it's subtracting more from the survivability side on the other. But it shows that an increase in damage can increase survivability, because the payoff is roughly the same with both of those two sides of the coin when it comes to Glass Cannon. But if we were to use something like Obliterate or Spotter instead of Glass Cannon, where we're just adding damage and we've just sacrificed the pure survivability, we haven't amplified it with Glass Cannon, it is possible to increase your survivability because you have increased damage, and killing enemies quicker will in fact reduce your total exposure. So that's one way where increasing on the damage side can actually have a positive effect by increasing your survivability on the other side. But it works both ways. Increasing your survivability can also have a positive effect on your DPS. In the next video, we'll start to explore some of those exchanges, and we'll do a comparison, for instance, of this build with Glass Cannon versus my silly test build, and see which one is more effective. And we'll start incorporating other builds more commonly used and see where is that sweet spot, what's most effective, and we'll start to incorporate those other principles from that two-sided coin to see what we can come up with. If you like, then like. If you want to see more, especially part 2, then subscribe and potentially notify. And I will see you in the next one. Fog out.